An old man in Japan received an order to write erotic manga, but he had no experience in this. So he decided to sleep with 100 girls to write a manga based on this. The sound of his pen scratching against paper filled the cramped studio as Yamamoto Kinji completed the final panel of what might be his last serialized manga. His arthritic fingers ached, each stroke a reminder of 40 years spent hunched over drawing boards. The afternoon light filtering through his window cast long shadows across scattered pages of rejected drafts, all bearing the same feedback in red ink. Too safe. No passion. Lacks authenticity. His phone buzzed. Another message from his editor. Meeting tomorrow. Important opportunity. Don't be late. Kinji's stomach churned. At 65, he knew what opportunity meant in this industry. A chance to gracefully retire. To make way for younger artists whose work didn't carry the stale scent of obsolescence. His latest series rankings had been slipping for months, each chapter a desperate attempt to capture the attention of readers, who seemed increasingly distant from his understanding. The next morning, in Diamond Publishing's sterile conference room, Editor-in-Chief Tanaka Shiori slid a contract across the polished table. 20 million yen, she said, her red lipstick curving into what might have been either a smile or a sneer. For a new series. Adult content. Erotic manga. The amount made Kinji's hands tremble. It was enough to cover his mounting medical bills, his youngest daughter's university tuition, and perhaps even repair the leaking roof of his aging house. But the genre? I've never, he started. Exactly, Shiori cut in, adjusting her designer glasses. Your work has technical precision, Yamamoto-sensei, but it lacks experience. Real passion. Raw emotion. She paused, letting her words sink in. We want authenticity. Something that makes readers feel the electricity of first touch, the desperation of desire, the weight of skin against skin. Kinji's face burned. In the reflection of the conference room window, he caught a glimpse of himself. Gray hair, wrinkled suit, the stooped posture of a man who had spent decades living through his art rather than living. His late wife's face flashed in his memory, their love having been more about quiet companionship than burning passion. The contract requires 10 volumes, Shiori continued, her voice cutting through his thoughts. First draft due in 3 months. And Yamamoto-sensei. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. We'll know if you're faking it. Readers can tell the difference between imagination and experience. That evening, in his local izakaya, Kinji nursed a warm sake and made calculations on a napkin. 10 volumes. 3 months for the first draft. His technical skills were impeccable, but his understanding of passion was theoretical at best. The memory of his editor's words echoed. Readers can tell the difference. His phone buzzed again. A notification from a dating app his youngest daughter had installed on his phone months ago, insisting he needed to get out more. He had never opened it, the very idea seeming ridiculous at his age. But now, Kinji's trembling finger hovered over the icon. The sake in his system whispered of possibilities. 20 million yen. 100 encounters. 1 for each chapter. A mathematical approach to passion. He opened the app. The first message came almost immediately. Interested in meeting an experienced manga artist? Kinji stared at the screen, his reflection distorted in its glow. In the background, the izakaya's old radio crackled with an enka song about lost love and redemption. He took another sip of sake, picked up his pen, and began to write. Research plan, 100 days, 100 women, 100 stories. The price of art, he was learning, could be measured in more than just yen. Kinji's reflection in the Love Hotel mirror was a study in contradiction. Freshly pressed suit, carefully combed hair, and eyes that couldn't quite meet their own gaze. The room's pink lighting cast unnatural shadows across his face, making the deep lines around his mouth look like cracks in a mask. His first research subject was due in 20 minutes. Miyuki, 42, office worker. Her profile photo showed a gentle smile that reminded him of the librarian at his old high school. They had exchanged messages for 3 days, each one requiring a full hour of composition on his part. Like scripting dialogue for a manga, he didn't know how to draw. The bed dominated the room, its red covers garish against the muted tones of the walls. Kenji had arrived early to sketch the setting, his artist's instincts seeking refuge in the familiar. But his hand shook too much to capture the curves of the heart-shaped headboard. His phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. "Dad, are you coming to dinner Sunday? Koji is making your favorite tempura." The normality of it struck him like a physical blow. How could he sit across from his son-in-law, share meals with his grandchildren, knowing what he was about to become? The contract from Diamond Publishing sat heavy in his briefcase, its weight measured in compromises. A knock at the door made him jump, sending his sketchbook sliding across the floor. When he opened it, Miyuki stood there in a navy blue business suit, looking as out of place as he felt. Her hands clutched her purse like a shield. "Yamamoto-sensei," she said, bowing slightly. I've read all your works. Cherry Blossom Days got me through my divorce last year." The mention of his old Slice of Life series twisted something inside him. That was honest work, stories about finding beauty in ordinary moments. Now here he was, about to corrupt those memories for both of them. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, gesturing to the electric kettle he'd brought from home, unable to bear the thought of using the room's plastic cups for vending machine coffee. They sat at the small table, steam rising between them like a barrier. Miyuki spoke of her office job, her teenage son, her collection of manga that filled an entire wall of her apartment. With each word, she became more human, more impossible to reduce to a research subject. "Why did you agree to meet me?" he found himself asking, breaking his own rule about maintaining professional distance. She studied her tea, her finger tracing the rim of the cup. "Your message was so honest. About needing to understand passion at our age. About feeling like time has passed us by." She looked up, her eyes clear and direct. "Maybe I wanted to feel something real too, even if just for research." Kenji reached for his sketchbook, not to draw, but to hide behind. The pages fell open to an old sketch of his wife in their garden, her face turned toward the sun. He had captured every detail except her eyes, those he could never quite get right. "I can't," he said softly, closing the sketchbook. "Not like this." Miyuki's relief was visible, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since she entered. "Then let's just talk," she said. "About manga, about life, about how strange it is to be our age and still not know what we're doing." They spent the next 2 hours sharing stories over endless cups of tea. Kenji found himself sketching as she spoke, not poses or situations, but the way her hands moved when she described her son's baseball games, the subtle shift in her expression when she talked about her dreams of writing her own manga someday. When they parted, she hesitated at the door. "Will this be enough? For your research?" Kenji looked at his sketches, pages filled not with eroticism, but with humanity. "No," he admitted. "But it's a start." That night, in his studio, he began to draw. The story that emerged wasn't about passion as his editors demanded, but about connection, two people finding a moment of understanding in an unlikely place. He knew it wouldn't satisfy the contract, knew that subject number 1 of 100 had taught him nothing about writing erotic manga. But as he worked through the night, his pen moving with newfound purpose, he realized he was capturing something far more intimate than skin against skin. He was drawing the space between people, the moment when masks begin to crack, when truth emerges in the simple act of being seen. His phone buzzed with another message from his editor. How's the research going? He left it unanswered, his pen continuing to move across the page, drawing stories his publishers might never want to see. 3 days after his meeting with Miyuki, Kenji sat in his editor's office, watching Shiori's face darken as she flipped through his sketches. Each page turning felt like a death sentence for his career. What is this, Yamamoto-sensei? Her voice carried the chill of winter. Tea ceremonies and conversation. Where's the passion? The raw emotion we discussed? She placed his sketchbook down with surgical precision. This isn't what Diamond Publishing is paying for. Behind her, through the window, Tokyo's skyline shimmered in the afternoon heat. Buildings reached toward heaven like the ambitions he'd once held, now crumbling under the weight of reality. I tried to, he began. No, Shiori cut in, removing her glasses. You didn't try. You played it safe. Again. She pulled out his contract, the number 20 million seeming to pulse on the page. Your mortgage payment is due next week. Your daughter's tuition the week after. Are you ready to let go of all that because you're too afraid to truly live? The truth of her words struck deeper than any physical blow. He thought of his wife, gone 5 years now. How many chances at passion had he let slip by, hiding behind his drawing board? How many stories remained untold because he feared their intensity? That evening, in a different love hotel, this one in Shinjuku, far from his usual haunts, Kenji met Reiko. 38, divorced, a dance instructor with eyes that held no illusions. She didn't want to talk about manga or dreams or lost opportunities. We both know why we're here, she said, her fingers working at his tie with practiced ease. No need to dress it up as something else. Something shifted in Kenji's chest, a wall crumbling, or perhaps being built. He thought of his sketchbook filled with tentative lines and half-formed ideas. Of 40 years spent observing life instead of living it. Of 20 million yen slipping away because he couldn't bridge the gap between observation and experience. His hands steadied. Later, as the neon lights from outside painted patterns across the ceiling, Kenji reached for his sketchbook with new purpose. His pen moved differently now, capturing moments of raw truth, the arch of a spine, the tension in fingertips, the way shadows played across bare skin. Each stroke carried the weight of first-hand knowledge. The next morning, he deleted his conversation with Miyuki. Her gentle understanding had no place in the story he needed to tell. He opened his research notebook, drawing a clean line through day 1, and typed a new message to his next contact. No more tea ceremonies. No more searching for connection in the spaces between moments. He had 98 more chapters to write, 98 more experiences to capture. The manga industry had no room for timid observers, and he had spent too long watching from the sidelines. His phone buzzed. Another potential subject, another opportunity to transform experience into art. This time, his hands didn't shake as he replied. In his studio, the contract from Diamond Publishing sat next to a new sketchbook, its pages still blank, waiting to be filled with a kind of truth that could only be written in the language of skin against skin. The old Yamamoto Kenji, the observer, the hesitant artist, was becoming something else entirely. He had stories to tell now, and they would burn on the page. By the 10th woman, Kenji had developed a system. Hotel rooms in Shibuya, always booked under different names. A leather-bound notebook for each encounter, pages filled with quick sketches and hurried notes about distinctive features, unique expressions, moments of unexpected vulnerability. The mechanical precision of his approach helped quiet the voice in his head that still whispered of shame. Yuriko, number 11, taught him about the art of anticipation. A former ballet dancer, she moved with deliberate grace, each gesture a story waiting to be captured. In the azure glow of the Love Hotel's mood lighting, Kenji found himself studying the way shadows played across her collarbone, how her fingers gripped the sheets, details that would translate into panels that made his editor's eyes widen with approval. "You're different," Yuriko said afterward, watching him sketch. "Most men try to forget. You're trying to remember everything." Her words haunted him as he walked home through Tokyo's neon-lit streets. The late autumn rain fell in sheets, but he barely noticed, his mind consumed with compositions, with the way certain curves could suggest everything while showing nothing. His latest chapters had begun to attract attention, whispers in the industry about the aging artist who had suddenly found his voice. But success came with its own price. His daughter had stopped calling after their last dinner together, when his attempts to maintain conversation had faltered, his mind drifting to deadlines and sketches and the next woman waiting in his schedule. His grandson's drawing, proudly presented at the table, remained unopened on his desk, buried under pages of anatomical studies. Number 15 was a mistake. She reminded him too much of his late wife. The same gentle way of tucking hair behind her ear, the same soft laugh. He found himself unable to separate memory from moment, past from present. That night, his sketches came out violent, angry lines that tore through the paper. By 20, the faces began to blur. He caught himself mixing up names, details, stories. His editor didn't care. The manga was selling, each chapter more intense than the last. The online forums buzzed with theories about how such an old man could capture such raw passion. Some suggested he had a ghost writer. Others claimed he had made a deal with the devil. "You found it," Chirori said during their weekly review, her perfectly manicured nail tapping a particularly explicit page. "This is what we wanted. This authenticity." Authentic. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. In the bathroom mirror at home, he barely recognized his own reflection. The shadows under his eyes deeper, the lines around his mouth etched with stories he never thought he'd tell. His sketchbooks filled one shelf, then another, each one a testament to experiences that felt increasingly hollow. Number 27 left crying. He never learned why. That night, he dreamed of drowning in a sea of blank pages, each one demanding to be filled with truth he no longer knew how to find. The manga series, now titled Midnight Confessions, climbed the sales charts. Fan letters poured in, mostly from women who saw in his work something they recognized, a desperate search for connection in a world of fleeting touches and temporary intimacy. They thought they understood the truth behind his art. None of them knew that truth had become as artificial as the neon signs that guided him from one hotel to the next. Number 33 was an artist herself. She sat cross-legged on the hotel bed, studying his original sketches with professional interest. "These early ones," she said, pointing to the pages from his first encounters, "they have soul. But these recent ones..." She flipped through the later pages. "It's like watching someone slowly go numb." Her observation cut through his carefully constructed detachment. That night, he pulled out his very first notebook, the one with Miyuki's story, the tea ceremony, the conversation he had once dismissed as insufficient. The pages carried an innocence he barely remembered, a genuine search for understanding that had somewhere transformed into mechanical documentation. But he was too far in now. 40 million yen spent, contracts signed, readers waiting. The path back to that initial innocence was obscured by the weight of experiences he couldn't unlearn, moments he couldn't undraw. His phone buzzed with a message from number 34. Another hotel room waited. Another story to capture. Another piece of himself to trade for art that felt increasingly like a beautiful lie. The rain had stopped, but Kenji opened his umbrella anyway, needing some kind of shield between himself and the neon-lit sky that seemed to judge him with its artificial brilliance. In his bag, blank pages waited to be filled with truths that felt more false with each telling. Number 47 noticed the tremor in his hands first. They were at a high-rise hotel in Roppongi, the city lights below creating patterns like scattered stars on the sheets. As Kenji reached for his sketchbook, his fingers betrayed him, sending charcoal lines splintering across the page. "You're shaking," she said, wrapping the hotel robe tighter around herself. Her eyes, sharp, analytical, reminded him of his editors. "How long has it been since you really slept?" He couldn't remember. The days had begun to blur like watercolors in rain, each experience bleeding into the next. His studio walls were now covered with fragments of intimacy, sketches that felt increasingly foreign, as if drawn by someone else's hands. The manga series was selling better than ever, each chapter darker, more intense than the last. That night, his daughter Sakura appeared at his apartment unannounced. The sight of her standing in his doorway, clutching a convenience store bag, made something crack inside him. "Dad," she said, taking in the chaos of his studio, the scattered drawings, the empty coffee cans, the unmade futon in the corner. "What's happening to you?" He wanted to tell her everything. About the contract that had seemed like salvation. About how each encounter left him feeling more hollow, more disconnected from the person he used to be. About how his art was thriving while his soul withered. Instead, he said, "It's just work, Sakura-chan." A demanding deadline. Her eyes fell on a particularly explicit sketch he'd forgotten to hide. The horror in her expression cut deeper than any editor's criticism. "This isn't you," she whispered. "This isn't my father." After she left, Kenji sat in the darkness of his studio, staring at his reflection in the computer screen. The man looking back at him was a stranger, eyes sunken, hair unkempt, mouth set in a hard line he didn't recognize. Number 52 was different. She asked questions about his work, seemed genuinely interested in the process. In the soft light of dawn, she traced the calluses on his drawing hand. "You're capturing everything except what matters," she said. "Where are you in these stories?" The question haunted him through his next 3 encounters. Each stroke of his pen felt mechanical, each intimate moment a performance he observed from somewhere outside himself. His editor praised the raw intensity of his latest chapters, never noticing how the protagonist's eyes grew increasingly vacant with each page. The breaking point came with number 56. Her name was Yuki, the same as his late wife's. She had the same gentle way of tilting her head when asking a question, the same quiet strength in her silence. In the middle of their encounter, panic seized him. The walls of the Love Hotel seemed to close in, the air thick with the weight of all he'd lost. His chest tightened, vision blurring. When Yuki reached out to touch his shoulder, he recoiled as if burned. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't do this anymore." She sat with him until the panic subsided, neither speaking nor touching, just existing in the shared space of their broken moment. When his breathing finally steadied, she picked up his sketchbook, flipping through pages of fragments, lips, hands, shadows, all disconnected from any sense of wholeness. "You're not collecting experiences," she said softly. "You're losing pieces of yourself." In the early morning hours, Kenji walked the empty streets of his neighborhood, his reflection multiplied in countless shop windows. Each version of himself stared back with accusing eyes. The contract in his bag felt heavier than ever. 44 more encounters, 44 more stories to capture, 44 more pieces of himself to sacrifice. His phone buzzed with messages from his editor, praising the dark evolution of his work. From his daughter, expressing worry. From number 57, confirming tomorrow's meeting. Standing at a crossroads, watching the first hints of dawn paint the sky, Kenji reached for his sketchbook. But instead of opening it, he held it over a nearby drain. One movement, and he could let it all go, the sketches, the memories, the hollow victory of commercial success. The city held its breath, waiting for his decision. The sketchbook didn't fall into the drain that morning. Instead, Kenji found himself at his late wife's grave, the first rays of dawn painting the stone in shades of gold. 56 encounters, 56 stories, 56 pieces of himself scattered across love hotel rooms like fallen cherry blossoms. His phone vibrated, number 57 canceling, something about a family emergency. The relief hit him like a physical wave, followed immediately by shame at that relief. He scrolled through his contacts, 58 through 100, all neatly arranged, each name a promise of another story, another fragment of his soul to trade for art. "I've lost my way, Yuki," he whispered to the stone. The morning air carried the scent of incense from nearby graves, mixing with the metallic tang of approaching rain. His editor's latest message glowed on his phone. "The darkness in your work, it's exactly what we wanted. The raw pain, the emptiness. Don't lose this edge." The edge? He traced his fingers over his latest sketches, faces twisted in what he had thought was passion, but now recognized as desperation. Each stroke of his pen had been carving deeper into his own darkness, selling pieces of his humanity for the illusion of artistic truth. That afternoon, in his studio, he spread out all his sketchbooks chronologically. The progression was stark, from his early attempts at capturing genuine connection, through the mechanical documentation of encounters, to the recent pages that seemed to bleed darkness onto the paper. Number 59 messaged him, suggesting a meeting point in Shinjuku. His fingers hovered over the reply button when his daughter's voicemail started playing. "Dad, I found your old manga in my closet yesterday, the one about the Cherry Blossom Festival. Remember how you used to say that true art comes from observing the light in ordinary moments? What happened to that, Father? Please come back to us." The Cherry Blossom manga. His first real success, created when Yuki was still alive. He dug through his shelves until he found a dusty copy, its pages yellowed with age. The story was simple. A high school girl learning to appreciate the beauty of fleeting moments, of connections that last only as long as falling petals. His phone buzzed again. "Sure, where's the next chapter? Deadline's tomorrow." Instead of replying, Kenji began to draw. Not the dark erotica his publisher wanted, but something else. A story about an old artist losing his way in the shadows of Tokyo's love hotels, searching for truth in empty encounters while real connections withered around him. Panel by panel, he poured out his journey, his descent, his recognition of what he'd nearly lost. He drew through the night, through dozens of missed calls from his editor, through messages from waiting women. When morning came, he had a complete chapter, raw, honest, painful in its truth. The response from Diamond Publishing was immediate and furious. "This isn't what we contracted for." Chururi raged over the phone. "This is career suicide." "No," Kenji said quietly, looking at his reflection in the window, clearer now, more familiar. "This is redemption." He called number 59, then 60 through 100. Each conversation was brief, respectful, final. With each canceled encounter, he felt pieces of himself returning, like color slowly seeping back into a monochrome world. His last call was to his daughter. "Sakura-chan," he said when she answered, his voice steady for the first time in months. "I found that Cherry Blossom manga you mentioned. Would you like to read it together? Like we used to?" The silence on the line stretched until he heard a soft sob. "I'll bring tea," she whispered. That evening, as rain fell softly outside, Kenji began his final manga series. Not about the 100 encounters he planned, but about the journey of an artist who had to lose himself completely to find his truth again. Each page was an act of reclamation, each panel a step back toward light. The advance money would have to be returned. His reputation in certain circles would be ruined. But as he drew the final panel, an old man sitting at his desk, surrounded by the gentle ghosts of cherry blossoms, Kenji felt the weight of his sketchbooks lift from his shoulders. He had sought authenticity in the darkness of strangers' embraces, only to find it in the courage to face his own reflection. The price of art, he finally understood, wasn't measured in experiences or yen, but in the truth you were willing to tell, even if that truth was about your own failures. Outside, the rain washed the city clean, and somewhere, cherry blossoms were waiting to bloom again. Thanks for watching this story to the end. Check out our previous videos here. Subscribe to our channel for more long-form stories like this, and see you next time.